How's everyone doing first? Y'all doing great? Energy's up? All right. So today, my talk's called Action Packed Community and Streamlining Community Management. I'm going to start with like a little horror death story in the spirit of Halloween, even though it was yesterday. My story is that I used to work at a startup and in my first developer job, and I was like super excited to start. I'm like, I just want to learn everything. So I naively signed up to like be part of the release management process. I was like, I want to learn how to like deploy and release the code. I don't want to just be coding it. And then that quickly turned into me like being responsible for all of the releases. But the problem with that is that like we did not have like a good infrastructure set up. We essentially had to do releases when nobody was online. So like that would be like Saturday night at like midnight, which I hated. And it was very, very manual process. So basically it like consisted of me like running bash scripts and SQL scripts. And I essentially had to like, every time there was a release, there would be a bug because we had different environments. We had like a staging environment that it would seem like everything was working well, and then on production it wouldn't. So I would always have to like go back and like fix the bugs, and then we had to like manually write out the release notes in Slack. At first I was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool, I'm in charge of the release, but it eventually became like super annoying. I would have preferred to be sleeping or hanging out with my boyfriend or something like that besides doing releases at midnight. And it made me feel like really burnt out eventually. Like I ended up leaving the job because I was like, I don't really like this. And so I want to know from y'all, do you have any like horror developer stories? Yeah, Josh, give me one. Or if you're not ready to say it, you could just raise your hand. Sounds like a developer. Awesome. So I'm sure maybe people can relate to like maybe not working at a company that has a really strong infrastructure. And I'll get more into that in a second. But first, you're probably like, who am I? Or maybe you do know who I am. But my name is Rizel. I am a junior developer advocate at GitHub. Prior to that, I was a software engineer for like 3 years, and I am an advisor, and I was a director at an organization called G-Code. It's a nonprofit that teaches women of color and non-binary people of color to code. I'm super passionate about teaching people about tech, and I'm also passionate about like Twitter, even though I guess it's kind of going down the drain a little bit now. But if you wanted to connect with me, my handle is @BlackGirlBytes on like Twitter, #no, dev.to, GitHub, Instagram. On Twitch, I'm BlackGirlBytes1 because I got myself locked out of my initial account, so. All right, so besides I do have a confession to tell y'all. Besides developer horror stories, I can't really do scary stories. I'm like terrified of like even trailers. Like trailers come on and I'm like, oh, I don't want to see it. Just because of like the way I grew up. My mom's like West Indian, so she's like no trick-or-treating, no Halloween, and she's also super Christian, so I just like never grew up around like scary stuff. But it's not like I'm a total dweeb. I do like TV. I like bad reality TV shows like Love is Blind and Married at First Sight. I'm just like, how many seasons can they put out that people will keep signing up for this? I like scammer docuseries, and I especially love like action, like superhero and anime shows. Like that's my favorite. And I think I like superhero and action shows because there's more nuance than, oh, this is like a good person versus a bad person. They kind of show the like personal problems or moral problems that they go through, and I find that really interesting. And like here's some superheroes or some action characters like She-Hulk, Spider-Man, On the top middle is like Eren Yeager from Attack on Titan. We got Black Adam, Hawkeye, and Endeavor. And you're probably like, why am I talking about these? But don't worry, it will all tie in. But I think one thing that they have in common is that they're not actually superheroes to everybody in their universe. Like, they're superheroes, but they're not everyone's heroes. They're not like one size fits all. And I find that concept pretty interesting. For example, Black Adam, for his country in the Middle East, it's like a made-up country. I don't remember. Oh. Well, I'll just, sorry about the spoilers, but it's going to be a small spoiler. But basically, he's liked by his country, but like the American-centric areas or part of the universe, they find him to be a villain. And I think it's the same with developer tools, right? Developer tools are not exactly for every single person. And I think that's why we tend to have little arguments or big arguments over certain technologies, because we feel like, oh my gosh, Tailwind saved my life, or CSS saved my life as a developer. So then the arguments get really, really heated. But I say do what works for you. If you prefer Tailwind to CSS, go ahead. If you prefer Next.js or Remix Run, SQL or MongoDB, or merge committing or squashing, do what works best for you. And for me, in my case, GitHub Actions was like my hero. So as I told y'all, I worked at that company that had a really terrible release management process. And then I went to a new company, and that company was using GitHub Actions. I had never heard of GitHub Actions before that. I was like, what is this thing? The release process took like less than 5 minutes. What else about it? It was really easy to revert. Like, if an issue happened, we can just revert the code, and we could do it during the day. I was like, wow, this is so cool. Like, I'm really into it. And that was my first time at recognizing that GitHub is more than a place to just store code. Like, prior to that, I was always like, okay, GitHub is where we store code, and that's it, or where we review code. But that made me realize that there's so much more innovation happening within GitHub products. And I think that platforms such as GitLab, such as GitHub, often foster community and innovation through open source. And I also will say, I think open source is eating the software world for both individual developers and businesses. And there's like so many different benefits, as you probably heard throughout this whole conference. Just a couple here that I've recognized for myself is it gives you more exposure to relevant technologies and other problems that you may have not encountered at your school or at your job. It helps to increase your network. It helps to increase like your job opportunities. Open source even allowed me to do my first keynote at All Things Open last year. So I contributed to open source for the first time. I wrote a blog post, and then Todd, who's one of the organizers, hit me up and was like, want to do a keynote? And I was like, me? What? Okay. So those are the benefits of open source to me. But there are like downsides that I recognize as I speak to different maintainers. And a lot of it is that like maintainers feel burnt out because they're like the CEO/CTO. They're like a marketer, product manager, HR, community manager, all of that one project. And it can get overwhelming. I found this article that was written in 2017 by Nolan Lawson, and he titled it, "What It Feels Like to Be an Open Source Maintainer." In it, he writes, "Outside your door stands a line of a few hundred people. They are patiently waiting for you to answer their questions, complaints, pull requests, and feature requests. You want to help all of them, but now you're putting it off. Maybe you had a hard day at work, or you're tired, or you're just trying to enjoy a weekend with family and friends. But if you go to github.com/notifications, there's a constant reminder of how many people are waiting." And like just those couple of paragraphs sound so burdensome, right? Like it sounds so like sad that that's the feeling that you would have as an open source maintainer, even though open source is so beneficial. So today I'm going to explore a couple of things. We're going to explore how you can create your own heroes if you're maybe interested in starting an open source project yourself. And we're going to talk about both like the social and technical issues. that these products can solve. When I initially wrote the CFP, I was thinking solely GitHub Actions, but after reading Nolan's article, I kind of switched it up a bit, so I hope you don't mind. So, my first suggestion, non-technical, like I think this is like a known thing but hard to do, is like don't overwork. Like if you're an open source maintainer and you want to work on open source after work, obviously, set a certain amount of hours. Like, say you're going to do 2 or 3 hours, and don't go beyond that. Because I think you might be like, oh, I'm getting more work done, but there's always going to be more work. So just cut it off right there and then. And then also continue to reevaluate periodically to decide if that number is too high. Maybe this week is a holiday for you or something like that. Scale it back and reduce as needed. My other suggestion is also a non-technical one, and that's don't do it alone, right? I think Brian Douglas, who runs Open Sauce, he does this really well, where he looks for his like top contributors, people who are really engaged in his project, people who want to build their product management skills, and he has them help out with on a triage team, and they help to triage the tickets or issues that he has. That way, he doesn't have to worry about that workload on him. He has other stuff he has to worry about, so he lets them like help with sorting the issues and stuff like that. That's one suggestion I have. My third one is with issue forms. Oftentimes when I talk to maintainers, they say they get like issues that like don't make too much sense or don't have enough detail in them. I say go ahead and leverage the issue forms that are within GitHub because they'll help to standardize and reduce the number of incomprehensible issues you receive. So in this next image, we'll see that this is an example of an issue form. For a bug report, you have your little required fields to make sure that people are describing the bug properly, making sure that they actually say the steps to reproduce, and making sure that they show which services were actually affected, whether it's like Firefox, Google Chrome, mobile, desktop, and leaves you with less guesses. Okay. The fourth suggestion, which I'm super passionate about, is compensation. I think a lot of times open source maintainers, they're doing a lot of work for free. And it is hard to figure out like how you're going to get compensated, but here's a few suggestions. Sign up for GitHub sponsors to get paid through your community. Also consider doing an open core model, so not all of your project has to be completely free, y'all. Like you can maybe have a premium tier and a free tier, or you can have the code open to everyone to contribute, but altogether to use the product you have to pay. And I do want, if anyone here is an employer, continue to invest in maintainers. Our businesses are like running off of open source projects. Like think about all the different NPM packages that if they didn't work anymore, our sites would probably go down, our apps would probably go down. So like continue to invest in maintainers, and I think projects like Netlify and Vercel are doing this really, really well. Okay. So now to some technical stuff. So my fifth suggestion is to automate as much as you can, as much as possible. And that's where GitHub Actions comes in. GitHub Actions are open source, customizable automation for your repository written in YAML, and you can essentially automate anything that happens within your repo. So let's talk a little bit more about GitHub Actions. Right now, there's over 14,000 GitHub Actions on the GitHub Marketplace. It's to the point that like you probably don't have to write a new action. You can probably find what you want on the GitHub Marketplace. And here's a couple of examples. So this one is from Open Sauce, which is Brian Douglas's project, and he has an action called the take action. Essentially, what this does is instead of a contributor saying, hey, I want to get this ticket, and then you got to wait for them to get back to you, and then you're like, okay, I'll assign you, and you're like, oh, did you start working on it, and all of that stuff. If you just type .take, it'll automatically assign you. You don't have to go through that runaround. Another example is my job uses an action that opens up an issue every week, and then it closes it every week. And yeah, Miss sees herself right here. But we use this as like to identify like the top 5 things that our DevRel team is going to work on, and for the week. That way our manager is up to date with what we're working on, because we're in different time zones. Like Mish is in Australia, I'm in Boston, and it helps to keep the flow like going well and everybody up to date. Here's a couple more. Like, you can use GitHub Actions for live previewing a PR. So instead of having to check out their branch, you can go ahead and just see what it looks like. It'll create a link for you. There's also tools or GitHub Actions to help you do regression testing. And let me see, this one is an action that helps you to run or find security vulnerabilities on a cron job. So I don't know if I should move over, because then I'll move from the mic. But right here at the top, you can see that it says when it's going to be triggered. So it could be triggered on a push, a pull request, or if that hasn't happened in a while, it'll also get triggered on a cron job for you to always be up to date on like what security vulnerabilities does my project have. So maybe people here may not feel like writing an action is scary for you. But I did do a talk before, and some people were like, I've never written an action before. So I decided I'm going to just go through the anatomy of an action really, really quickly. So I don't know if y'all could see that very well. Looks a little fuzzy on my side, but we'll see. So at the top, it says name. That is just the name of your workflow. And then where it has the words on, that's where you specify when you want the workflow to be triggered. So in this case, this workflow is going to be triggered on a push to the main branch or a pull request to the main branch. Then the next step is specifying what you want it to run on. So this is basically specifying what server or machine you want your action to run on. In this situation, I'm just running it on Ubuntu latest, which is like GitHub's thing. But if you have your own self-hosted runner, you can go ahead and put that in. And then this matrix part could look scary, but that's just running multiple jobs concurrently for you. And then after that is where you'll specify the different steps. So you might be calling another action. You might be running certain CLI commands, whatever you want left in there. And people often talk to me about security vulnerabilities with GitHub Actions. It is a little bit prone to security vulnerabilities if you're not paying attention to what you should do. So here's a couple of tips. You can use specific action version tags to make sure that like you're using the most updated one. Because sometimes maybe the creator of an action had a security vulnerability or some kind of bug, and they patched it up and made a new version. If you're using the older version, you're prone to an attack. So make sure you're using the specific action version tags. And then also on top of that, don't use plain text secrets. I feel like this is a given, but maybe people don't know. We do have a secret store for GitHub Actions, and you can reference them with the little $sign and the curly braces with the keyword secret and then the actual name of that token. Okay, moving on from GitHub Actions, also my suggestion is uniform some of your environments. Or not uniform some of your environments, uniform all the environments and the contributor experience with GitHub Codespaces. I love Codespaces, and I'll tell y'all a little bit about what it is. It allows you to code in a container hosted in the cloud. All that means is you get Visual Studio Code in your browser. And I'll show y'all a little bit more, right? And the benefits of that is that you get faster onboarding. Someone can open up your project and immediately have all the things they need installed, all the environment variables they need. It can be up and running pretty quickly. You also can code from anywhere, rather than going ahead and, like, let's say you forgot your laptop and you're like, oh, dang, now I gotta clone the repo and go through the whole environment setup again, which I don't know about y'all, but I really hate setting up my environment. Codespaces allows you to even do something like code on your iPad, like if you're on a plane. As long as you have, like, Wi-Fi and internet access, Codespaces allows you to do that. And then last but not least, it helps with consistent environments. And this part I really love because of that initial story I told you about struggling with the release management process where staging was different than production. GitHub Codespaces uses containers, so you get the same results and the same developer experience in your local environment as you would in your production environment. Let me check the time because I know I created a lot of slides. Oh, I think I'm good. Okay, so the way to configure code spaces, because if you open up code spaces, things will work. You can go ahead and run code. But if you want to make sure that you get that faster onboarding, that you get the consistent environments and all the other things I mentioned, you got to care about your dev container.json, your Docker compose file, and your Docker file. So for the dev container.json, this tells GitHub Codespaces how to configure a code space, and this is what it can look like. It looks a little bit scary, but all that's specified in here is, like, for example, what extensions you want to be installed as soon as someone opens up that code space. So here, I want to have ESLint automatically installed, Prettier, and then VS Live Share. Then you can also specify what ports you want it to automatically run on, whether you want it to run on localhost 8000 or localhost 3000, and then maybe you want, as soon as someone opens up the code space, for it automatically to run yarn install so the person has all their packages that they need. You also want to have a Docker file that tells GitHub Codespaces how to build the container. This one looks really simple. This one that I have for a Node project, just one line that says from Node 16 and then bullseye. Essentially, I want to use Node. And last but not least is the Docker compose.yaml. This one is not required or necessarily needed, but if you do want to run multiple containers, like let's say you want to run a web server in a code space and you want to run a database, but you want them to use separate containers, this is where a Docker compose file can come in handy. And that's what it can look like for you. Okay. And then my last suggestion, and don't worry, I will have a really fun demo at the end, is that it can help you to increase, you can help yourself to increase productivity by leveraging GitHub Copilot. I find GitHub Copilot kind of fun. I'm just like always surprised at how quickly it's able to almost feel like it reads my mind and picks up on what I want. All right, so quickly for anybody who doesn't know, GitHub Copilot is an AI peer programmer that helps you to code faster with way less work. And it's not magic. It does feel like it sometimes to me, but it cannot read my mind. And actually, it doesn't always spit out perfectly well-written, up-to-date code. But I believe that you can get the best results from GitHub Copilot by writing really clear comments, because what it's doing is it's interpreting the context from those comments. And I've had a better time using GitHub Copilot once I started writing more comments, and like that doesn't hurt anybody, because now that you have more comments in your code, even humans understand your code too. So under the hood, what's happening, it's drawing context from your comments in your code, and it'll suggest whole lines individually, and it's being powered by OpenAI Codex. Now, I didn't really know what Codex was at first, so I decided to do a little bit of research. Apparently, it's a model that translates natural language into code, and it's actually a different version or an updated version of GPT-3. And GPT-3 stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer 3. And what it does is it uses deep learning to produce human-like text. And actually, a lot of apps use GPT-3. Like Duolingo uses it for French grammar correction. But the difference between GPT-3 and Codex is that it's more fine-tuned for programming. Cool. So here's a couple of examples of Copilot in action. I think Copilot's my favorite thing. So MilMikeDev sent me this GIF after I wrote a blog post about Copilot. And basically what they're doing here is they want to translate the words answer, question, and date into a different language. And all that they've done is basically specify the language code, and Copilot's picking up on that pretty quickly. So as you can see, for French and Japanese and all the other languages, it was able to translate it. I think Copilot's also really awesome for regex. I do not like doing regex, I'm sorry. It's like, I think it's cool and very powerful, but I'm not going to be able to ever memorize all of those symbols and digits. And here in this GIF, I'm essentially validating a phone number, and I decided to run it just to double check, because I'm like, maybe Copilot just generated nonsense, but it actually did work. It actually did like provide the correct regex for me. Another example that I've seen people use it for is documentation. They've added, so here we have my friend Hayden Barnes, and basically what he's doing is he's writing install requirements for some project. I don't know which one, but he specifies that on SUSE what he wants to do, and Copilot already picks up on the actual commands that are needed to run that project or to set that project up, which I thought is really impressive. I do want to note that Copilot's not really made for like pros and like written documentation, but for like little code snippets and stuff like that, that can help you to go a little bit faster. And something else that I discovered about Copilot that I really think is exciting is that it actually understands Spanish and other languages. Me and my friend Ramon, we were playing around with Copilot the other day, and he was like, what if you like wrote something in Spanish? I'm like, okay, I don't know Spanish. Tell me some Spanish. So he told me to write this, and essentially it translates to like import the necessary libraries for this project. I do that, and on the next line, it suggests that I import Tweepy, which is the exact like library that I needed. All right, so I'm gonna get into my demo. I pre-recorded it because I wasn't sure about the Wi-Fi. It seems to be pretty good, but I'm gonna just stick with it. So in this pre-recording, I hope y'all can see it. Let me know if you can. Cool? Cool. All right. So in this pre-recording, I essentially am just writing a whole bunch of comments. So I write import the Tweepy library. It does that. I write import my config file. It does that. And then after that, I wanted to like connect to the Tweepy client. So it's literally just like auto-completing. I'm just pressing tab. The only thing I'm going to do is like fix the tabbing. And keep in mind, I don't know Python. Like I'm writing in Python, but I don't write in Python. I write JavaScript. So I'm just going to like format it really quickly, and then I'm going to create a variable of like what text I want to happen in the tweet. And I moved a little fast, but just to let y'all know, I'm writing this code to connect to Twitter to send a tweet on my Twitter account, but I'll let it keep going. So here in the suggestion, it's trying to guess what I'm trying to say. It's like, I am a tweet from Python. I'm like, that's close. And this example is from GitHub Universe. So if y'all want to go to GitHub Universe, you will see this. But basically, I want the tweet to say, hi, I am at GitHub Universe, and I sent this tweet with Copilot. So in the next line, it literally writes that so quickly. And then I'm like, okay, now I want to actually send the tweet. And I press tab. Again, it generates that for me, and then I want to print the response. So I'm going to go ahead and actually run it. And let's see what happens. So I'm typing super slow, but I'm writing send tweet, and it looks like it was successful. I'm going to go ahead and check my Twitter account to actually see if it was successful. And if we scroll, we'll see that I did actually tweet that out. It says, I'm at GitHub Universe. And I'm like, this is so cool. All right. So I spoke really fast, faster than I expected. But that is all for learning about open source and how we can streamline our community management. If you did want to learn more, you can go ahead and check out GitHub's documentation. Or you can go check out some of my blog posts. I write a lot about Copilot, GitHub Actions, code spaces. Also, go ahead and follow me at Black Girl Bytes. And I do have an article called 8 Things You Didn't Know You Could Do with GitHub Copilot, which expands way more than what I actually showed in this talk. So go ahead and check that out, y'all. Anyone have questions? Yes. Yes. Yeah, I have a more full talk on GitHub Copilot, but yes, it works with IntelliJ, Vim, VS Code, Visual Studio Code, I think JetBrains too. Yeah. Anyone else? I know I spoke like super fast. Sorry. Yeah. What's Ooh. I would say if I was going to do that, if I was going to try it out on GitHub and because it wouldn't work like within like GitHub's UI, but maybe I would like write an API. I mean, not write an API, but like write some code using GitHub's API or something like that, and then have that happen. But I don't know if it will like work within GitHub's UI. Yeah. Yeah, you can. Yeah, that makes actually more sense to use GitHub Actions when you see a certain response, have it respond, just like the take action that I showed earlier. And where was it? Yeah. Yeah, I edited that because I was like, someone took my issue, and you were like, oh, well, you can just edit it. And I was like, okay. But yeah, like this one is an example of like having a GitHub action respond to you instead. Cool. Yeah. I think it could be complementary. Like GitHub Actions can work with other like CI/CD tools. Yeah. Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, you can build on. You can. I've seen people use it with like Travis CI, Circle CI, and stuff like different use cases that maybe I haven't come across. Like I haven't had to use, but I have seen people do that. Yeah. Well, if there's not too many other questions, I guess y'all could be free. Are there any other like thoughts or comments? I figure like most people might be familiar with GitHub Actions and Code Spaces and Copilot already. But if there's anything else, like, or you don't want to ask it in front of everybody, oh, yes, what's up?
Is GitHub Actions also, like, you can push to it from an API like a CID, such as Common Room, right? So you can create an automation Common Room, and then you can tell GitHub Actions to perform it.
Let me make sure that I understood you. You said, can you use GitHub Actions that if you made a comment, it'll tell you if it was performant? Sorry.
So if you have a GitHub action that you want it to perform,
Yeah.
you're able to push that action from a different software, for instance, Common Room. So
Oh.
they have automation triggers, and you can use that automation trigger to run a script on GitHub Actions.
Oh, I don't know. That's actually an interesting use case. Um,
It's an aggregated platform tool, which means you can push scripts on GitHub Actions from other tools,
yeah.
a native CRM. That creates a lot more flexibility.
Yeah. Yeah, I do.
I think, yeah, as long as you can specify, see if she's got at the top there, like on, like how, when does this work or when does this action trigger? This is triggering when a push is made to the main branch or pull request is made to the main branch. So if there is a trigger you can put in there that would make sense, then you could most likely do it.
Thanks, y'all. I never used it for that use case, so I was like, I don't know. Did you say something? Or, oh, I thought I saw you raise your hand. Oh, what's up? What's your request?
I heard when people say that, this
Yeah. Yeah, I can. Yeah. I can do that. Cool. Alrighty. I think I held y'all hostage long enough. So, thank you.